So hey everyone, we're here today at the Tulare Community Church. We're looking at this Rodgers 950, and we're actually going to take the keyboard stack out of this instrument to put new keys in it. We've seen this instrument before. I did a video about how I rebuild the pedal boards on Rodgers instruments, replacing the up-down stops that we affectionately call the pedal bumpers. And then I made another video where we took a look at the replacement of the memory battery. This organ was built in the 90s. Computing systems back then needed a battery backup so that you didn't lose your combination pistons and things like that. So while I was at the church on Thursday of this past week, there were a couple of gentlemen there who were asking me a lot of questions and wanted to take a look inside the organ and all of that. And that's fine. I don't mind when people want to come around and, find out what I'm doing. And most people have never seen the inside of any kind of organ. And so that was fine, except that I really didn't get a lot of usable footage for this video. And I certainly didn't get to, do what I'm going to do here today, because I want to show you this keyboard setup. So this is the first time that I had removed this particular style of keyboard setup, and there's just a huge variety of keyboards and slips and things, and the service manuals probably cover all of them if you were to read through all of the service manuals. But a lot of times when you're out in the field, you run into something you haven't seen before, haven't done before, and so what do? Well, you got to be careful. Do no harm. Work slowly and thoughtfully, and I did, we got this all taken out and it's here and everything's fine, and we did no harm along the way. So keyboards are kind of an interesting topic when we get into keyboard instruments, especially when we're dealing with some type of electronic keyboard instrument. There's a lot of mythology about keyboards. There's a lot of variety in how keyboards are put together, and people definitely have preferences. There's a lot of emotion that goes into the world of keyboards, and it's just really kind of intriguing to me. When I was young, and there's still some of this going around, you hear it once in a while, ivory key tops were like the thing, And the problem is you have to go out and needlessly slaughter elephants to get ivory key tops. Now, if you go back to earlier times, before the invention of plastics, ivory was actually just a cheap and plentiful material when there were fewer people and a lot more elephants. But to me, it's still kind of cruel to go out and kill a beautiful animal just for their teeth. And when I was coming into the organ business as a young man in the 70s and 80s, a couple of guys I worked with were just adamant that ivory key tops were superior, and if an elephant dies, they should harvest that tusk and make ivory key tops out of it, And I challenged one of them, and I said, you can't convince me that your playing is improved simply because there's an elephant's tooth on top of the key. And he said, well, it's this, it's that, it's blah 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 blah. And I said, well, what about reverse color keys, where the natural keys that are normally white are covered in ebony or some other wood, and then the sharp keys that are normally black are covered with a thin wafer of ivory. And I obviously had him stumped at that point, because he was like struggling to find an answer, and then finally he comes up, well, at least that's a natural material. So when we look at keyboards that have any kind of plastic involved, whether it just be the key top or the whole key, like in this case, is molded out of plastic, there are people that look upon that as being inferior. And in my experience working on a whole host of different types of keyboards, just because the keyboard is made out of wood doesn't mean it's a better keyboard. And just because the keyboard is made out of plastic or metal or a combination therein doesn't really mean it's an inferior keyboard. The fact is that really nice keys are made in a variety of ways. Now, several videos back, we looked at an older Rodgers keyboard that was an all-wood keyboard with plastic tops, and I made that into a custom MIDI controller. Rodgers has used a wide variety of keyboards over the years. If we're looking at wood keys, most often those are made by Laukouf or Pratt & Reed. I believe the keyboard that I worked on to make the custom MIDI controller was a Pratt & Reed keyboard, it appears to be. And that's usually what I run into out in the field on older instruments. I see those wooden keys with the plastic covers, and they're very nice keyboards. They have a nice feel to them, and I think they're terrific. The other type of key, Pratt & Reed, by the way, also made a metal and plastic keyboard that was used on some instruments. You also have keys that are made from a metal shank and then a molded plastic keyboard key on the end of it. The keyboards on this mixture organ are built that way. And most of the keyboards you'll find on brand new Rodgers instruments are this type of keyboard here. This is the Fitar TP60LF, and it's actually a very good quality key. Has a nice touch, nice feel to it. I don't have any problem with that at all. These keys here are an all plastic key. In other words, if we look at like a Leduca or a Fitar key like this that has the metal shank, that functioning part, the pivot and all of that, where the spring attached, that's a metal piece, and then the key itself is a plastic piece. On these keyboards here, we're looking at the entire key is a molded plastic piece. And again, that can be just fine. These keyboards feel okay, and that's not the reason they're being removed and replaced. So there's really no problem with that. Currently, Fitar makes a wide variety of keys. Most of them are metal shank, and then they'll have either a plastic or a wood key on the end. You can get either plastic tops or wood veneer tops, depending on what you want. They also make all plastic keys. Roland, a lot of the keyboards on Rodgers organs from like this era were Roland keyboards. This is a Fitar keyboard, and like I say, the all plastic keys can be fine if they're built thoughtfully, and I don't see any problem with these keys other than there's a specific issue, and we're going to talk about that today. Fitar does make a key, and let me go grab that you find on these. I'll cover up the name brand markings here. These keys on this little cheap MIDI controller are truly all plastic. There's no metal frame, nothing like that. And actually, there's no pivot point. The key itself just flexes the plastic itself. And they feel kind of spongy, you know, because it's just the plastic of the key flexing like that. But you know, that's a $50 MIDI controller. What do you expect? So, any rate, why are we taking these keys out and replacing them on this organ? It's got nothing to do with the keys themselves. They're fine. It has to do with a unique and short-lived mistake that the Fitar company made very briefly in the 90s. And those of you out there who have worked on synthesizer keyboards and digital pianos from the 90s, you are familiar with what's commonly referred to as the pink glue problem. So, for a brief period of time, there was a glue. It was most often pink that was used in the assembly of these keys, and that glue wasn't stable over time, and it would reliquefy and drip into the key mechanism, and then we get keys that stick, don't go down in groups because there's glue stuck in there. There's a really bad one down here. It's not as bad on here, but if you turn the keys up, we can see that the pink glue problem is there. So that is the reason these keys are being replaced. A lot of people have tried to come up with a way of cleaning that glue up and maybe taking the keys apart, but the thing is, by the time you do all of that, if you can replace the keyboard with something else, that's probably the way to go, because it's just an enormous amount of work to try and get all of this apart and get all of that glue out of there, and then reassemble the keys with something else a little more stable. So let's take a look at how this keyboard works. So these are velocity sensitive keys, and we're going to talk a little bit about how velocity sensitivity is achieved on a keyboard like this, on a MIDI electronic keyboard. So there's some schematics here that I found from MIDI Boutique, who makes a DIY MIDI encoder similar to what I used from DTS on the other keyboard. And this one is for velocity sensitive, and it will work two ways. And I'll put up a still shot while I'm talking about this so you can take a good look at it. So first, let's look at break and make. That is one way we achieve velocity sensitivity. So what has to happen is you have to have two contacts. And in the break and make system, you can see that there's a symbol for a single switch, and there's a U and an L, and that stands for upper and lower. And what happens in the break and make scenario is that when you hit the key, the upper key contact is broken. When the key reaches the bottom, the lower key contact makes, hence the name break and make. The time differential between those two events is what the encoder measures to determine the velocity number that is sent out on the MIDI signal. Now, let's look at the next schematic. And here we have parallel key contacts. And the way this works is you again have an upper and a lower, but the keyboard is depressing both at the same time. One of them makes first, the other one makes second. So again, we have a time differential between two events, and that is what the encoder calculates out to try and determine the MIDI velocity number that's going to be set. So an encoder for a velocity sensitive keyboard has to send the MIDI note, the MIDI channel, and the MIDI velocity to the MIDI device so that it knows what the musician is asking for. So most common that I've seen, I've never seen a break and make key contact system. The only ones I've ever seen are the parallel where one goes down and the other follows. And that's what these keyboards have. So I've got some spare parts here. We'll look at one of those. I'll try to get in close so you can see it. So underneath each key are these And these are like little rubber domes, and you can see there's two spots in them. If I turn it over, you can see that there's two black dots. So this is an impregnation of carbon, and that goes down, depresses onto a circuit board. The one over here makes first. This one, the bottom one, makes second, and that's how you get your velocity sensitivity, and then it looks like that when it's depressed by the key. So let's pull one of these up. So we get underneath this keyboard, we see we have a circuit board here, and that is where our key contact system is functioning. This is the parallel system, and it's also an 8x-N matrix wiring system, which we've talked about before. So I'll pull this board off. Now what's a little unique on this one is that the rubber contacts are not attached to the circuit board. They're attached into these sockets on the frame of the keyboard, and then the key pushes on those, and then this circuit board is pressed up against there. I'm going to take a little closer look at this. You can see the two spots. Now again, we've got a carbon impregnation on the circuit board, and so this top one is our first and this one is our second. So we have like a high and a low. And then each of those is with these diodes set up as an 8x8 matrix. And that means that we have, in this case, this is 32 notes long. So we have 8x4 on each of these boards. Put two of them together, you end up with 64 total, but we're using 61 of them. Next time we're probably going to look at some more MIDI build stuff on my series on Build Your Own MIDI controllers. These keyboards are going out to a guy in Los Angeles who's going to reconfigure the slips and mount the new keyboards in there. And then when we put this all back, we'll go back out to the church, and hopefully I can get some better video putting this all back together. So anyway, see you next time.